two teenage girls were thrown out of the mansion into the pouring rain, without explanation and without mercy. Their father's new wife said they were just a burden, and that they wouldn't inherit a dime. But what nobody knew was that they were, in fact, the rightful heirs to the entire fortune. If this incredible story of love and resilience has you hooked, make sure to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from in the comments. Now, on with the story. The rain pounded against the window panes of the Miller mansion when Isabella and Valentina, 17-year-old twins, were ripped from their rooms in the middle of the night. There was no explanation, no time for questions, just curt orders from two unknown security guards they had never seen before in the house they had called home for 5 years. "Just take the essentials," said Veronica Miller, the woman who, until 3 days ago, had smiled sweetly at them during dinner. Now, her green eyes shone with a cutting coldness, as if the girls were intruders who were finally being removed. "You have 5 minutes." Isabella, always the more inquisitive of the two, tried to approach her stepmother. "Veronica, what's going on? Where's Dad? Why are these men here?" "Your father?" Veronica let out a bitter laugh that echoed down the marble hallway. "Robert is where he needs to be, far away from here, and you should be too." She adjusted her red silk robe and crossed her arms. "As of right now, this house is no longer a place for you two." Valentina, more sensitive and always attuned to details, noticed something strange. The hallway walls, once filled with family photographs, were empty. The portraits of their biological mother, Cecilia, who had passed away 2 years prior, had simply vanished. Even the photos from Robert and Veronica's wedding were gone, leaving only lighter rectangular marks on the paint. "Mum's portraits," Valentina whispered, pointing to the bare walls. "What happened to them?" "The past is the past," Veronica answered with disdain. "This house needs a fresh start, and that fresh start doesn't include you two." Isabella's heart began to race. Something was terribly wrong. 3 days ago, Robert had left for a routine doctor's appointment and hadn't come home. Veronica said he needed to travel to New York City urgently for some more complex tests. But why hadn't she let them go with him? Why didn't she answer when Isabella insisted on speaking to him on the phone? "We want to talk to our father," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He would never leave us like this without an explanation." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Your father made a decision. You are no longer his responsibility." She gestured to the security guards. "Charles, Mark, escort the girls to their rooms. 5 minutes, just basic clothes." As they climbed the stairs, they knew by heart. Isabella and Valentina exchanged terrified glances. The house where they grew up after Robert married Veronica felt alien, as if every shadow held a secret. The 3-story mansion, with its perfectly manicured gardens and crystal-clear pool, had always been a refuge. Robert Miller, a real estate developer and owner of a construction company that put up buildings all over the state, had provided them with a life of comfort after the loss of their mother. In their rooms, they grabbed simple clothes, a few books, and personal photographs. Isabella packed the necklace her biological mother had given her, a heart-shaped pendant with a small emerald. Valentina grabbed the diary she had been writing in since she was 12 and a teddy bear her father had given her for her last birthday. "Isabella," Valentina murmured, as she zipped up an old-school backpack, "I'm scared. What if Dad really did abandon us?" "That doesn't make any sense," Isabella replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Dad loves us. He always said we were his princesses. Something is wrong, very wrong." When they came downstairs, Veronica was waiting for them at the front door with a lawyer. They didn't know. The man in the grey suit held a folder of documents and avoided looking directly at the girls. "This is Mr. Thompson," Veronica said. "He's going to explain your legal situation." The lawyer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Girls, by your father's directive, you no longer have the right to reside on this property. The documents have been updated and—" He hesitated, glancing at Veronica. "You will need to find accommodation elsewhere." "What documents?" Isabella stepped forward. "We want to see them. We want to talk to our father first." "That's not possible," Veronica cut in. Robert is undergoing medical treatment and cannot be disturbed. The decision is final. The rain intensified outside. Thunder echoed in the dark pre-dawn sky. The girls were led to the mansion's front door, their simple backpacks a stark contrast to the grandeur of the foyer. The crystal chandelier that used to illuminate family dinners now seemed to mock their situation. "Where are we supposed to go?" Valentina asked, her voice trembling. "That's your problem," Veronica said, opening the heavy wooden door. The rain blew in through the opening, wetting the marble floor. "You're old enough to fend for yourselves." "We're 17, Isabella protested. "We're minors." "Details," Veronica muttered, making an impatient gesture. "What matters is that this house is no longer your home." Before they were pushed outside, Isabella noticed something that made her shudder. On the foyer table, where Robert's car keys and some work papers were always kept, there was a single sheet of paper. She managed to glimpse the letterhead. Medical report, diagnosis of early onset dementia. "Is Dad sick?" Isabella yelled, trying to break free from the security guard's grip. Veronica smiled, but there was no warmth in her expression. "Robert is exactly where he needs to be, and you are finally leaving the place you never should have been." The mansion's gate slammed shut with a metallic clang. Isabella and Valentina were left outside, under the torrential rain, watching the lights of the house go out one by one. The only house they had known as a home had now become an inaccessible fortress. "What are we going to do now?" Valentina whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. Isabella pulled her sister under the awning of a neighboring house. Their clothes were soaked and the early morning chill made them shiver. "We're going to find out what's really going on," she said, squeezing her sister's hand. "And we're going to find Dad, I promise." But as she spoke, a terrible question echoed in her mind. Where was Robert Miller? And why did Veronica seem so confident that they would never return? The storm raged on, and the two girls, heiresses to an empire they didn't even know they possessed, walked through the night toward an uncertain future, never imagining that the woman who had thrown them out had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The dawn arrived grey and cold, finding Isabella and Valentina huddled at a bus stop 3 blocks from the mansion. Their clothes were still damp from the overnight rain, and both of their stomachs were growling with hunger. Valentina shivered as she saw her reflection in the glass of the bus shelter. Messy hair, eyes swollen from crying, the look of someone who had spent the night on the street. "I need to use the bathroom," Valentina murmured, clutching her backpack to her chest. Isabella looked around. The neighborhood where they had always lived was residential, full of large houses and high walls. There were no stores, nearby no public places where they could take refuge. "Let's go downtown," she said, trying to sound decisive. "We'll have more options there." The two walked through the empty morning streets, passing houses they knew by sight. A few housekeepers were already arriving for work, looking curiously at the two girls with backpacks. Isabella shrank, wondering what they were thinking. Yesterday, they were the daughters of the developer Robert Miller. Today, they were... what? At the first drugstore they found open, Isabella asked to use the restroom. The employee, a middle-aged woman with a tired expression, looked them up and down. "Customers only," she said dryly. "Are you buying something?" Isabella dug through her pockets and found only $15 she had forgotten in her jeans. "We can buy a bottle of water," she offered. The woman sighed and pointed to the back of the store. "Make it quick." In the tiny drugstore bathroom, Valentina finally broke down. "Isabella, what are we going to do? We have no money, nowhere to stay. We don't even have our IDs. Veronica didn't let us grab anything important." Isabella hugged her sister, feeling her own desperation grow. "We'll figure it out. First thing, we need to find out where Dad really is. Second, we need to find someone who can help us." "Who?" "All of Dad's friends know Veronica. What if she's told them some lie about us?" Valentina's question echoed in Isabella's mind. It was true. Veronica had had 3 years to build relationships, to plant information, to prepare the ground. Who would believe the story of 2 desperate girls against the word of the respectable widow? They left the drugstore and walked to a park in the center of town. It was early on a weekday morning, and some shopkeepers were opening their stores. Isabella noticed an old internet cafe on a side street. "Let's try to use the internet," she said. "Maybe we can find some information about Dad." The owner of the internet cafe, an old man with a grey beard named Anthony, charged $5 for half an hour. Isabella paid with part of the money they had and sat down at an old, slow computer. "Look up news about Dad's company," Valentina suggested, pulling a chair up next to her sister. Isabella typed Miller Construction into the search engine. The first results confused her. The company was listed normally, but in recent news Robert's name wasn't mentioned. Instead, Veronica Miller appeared as the new CEO in a story about a major real estate project. "Look at this," Isabella said, pointing to the screen. "It says Veronica took over the company after Dad stepped down due to health problems. When did this happen?" Valentina read over her sister's shoulder. "The article is from a week ago, but Dad never said anything about stepping down from the company. He loved that job." Isabella kept searching and found something even more disturbing. On a local gossip site there was a small blurb with the headline, "Developer in treatment leaves wife in charge of business." The article mentioned that Robert Miller was at a specialized clinic outside the city and that Veronica was bravely maintaining her husband's legacy. "Specialized clinic," Valentina repeated. "For what?" "It doesn't say," Isabella murmured, feeling a chill. "But there's something very strange about all this." They tried to look for more information, but their time on the computer ran out. Isabella didn't have enough money to pay for another session. They left the internet cafe more confused than before. The morning wore on, and the sun grew hotter, making their damp clothes stick uncomfortably to their bodies. They sat on a park bench watching people pass by. Men in suits heading to work, mothers taking children to school, normal life happening all around them while their world had fallen apart. "I'm so hungry," Valentina said quietly. Isabella looked at the $10 she had left. They needed to save it, but they couldn't go without eating. They bought 2 rolls from the cheapest bakery they could find and shared a bottle of water. "Remember, Carmen," Valentina said suddenly, nibbling on her roll, "the housekeeper who worked for us for 2 years?" Isabella nodded. Carmen was a kind old woman who had taken care of them lovingly after their biological mother died. Veronica fired her last year, said she was reorganizing the household staff. But she really liked us. And she knew Dad even before he married Veronica. "You think she would help us? She lived in Elmwood Park, remember? Maybe she still lives there." It was a thread of hope. Isabella clung to it. "Let's try to find her." Elmwood Park was on the other side of the city. They didn't have money for the bus, so they started walking. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, and their backpacks seemed to get heavier with every block. After a 2-hour walk, they stopped at a gas station to drink water from the bathroom tap and rest in the shade. A gas station attendant watched them curiously. "Are you girls okay?" he asked. "You look lost." Isabella hesitated. Should they tell a stranger the truth? "We're looking for someone," she said finally. "In Elmwood Park." "You know it?" "Sure do. I've worked here for years, know almost everyone in the neighborhood. What's the name?" "Carmen Smith." The man's face lit up. "Carmen, of course I know her. Good woman, always polite. Lives on Flower Street, number 45. Yellow house with a green gate." Isabella felt a wave of relief. "She still lives there?" "Yep. Saw her here yesterday buying cigarettes for her husband." Energized by the first good news of the day, they resumed their walk. Elmwood Park was a simple neighborhood, with small houses and narrow streets. Flower Street was one of the last streets in the neighborhood, and number 45 was indeed a yellow house with a green gate. Isabella took a deep breath before knocking on the door. Footsteps approached from the other side, and then the door opened, revealing the familiar face of Carmen Smith. The woman, in her late 50s with grey hair tied in a bun, looked at them, and her expression changed from curiosity to shock. "Isabella. Valentina." Carmen blinked several times, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Girls, What are you doing here? How did you find me? Carmen, Isabella said, feeling her eyes well up with tears. We need your help. Something terrible has happened. Carmen looked at their backpacks, their wrinkled clothes, their tired faces. Without asking any more questions, she opened the gate. Come in, let's talk. Carmen's house was small but cozy. She took them to the kitchen and made coffee while they told her what had happened. With every word, Carmen's face grew more serious. I knew it, she murmured when they finished. I knew that woman was no good. When she fired me, she said some very strange things about you two. What kind of things? Valentina asked. Carmen hesitated. She said you were a burden to your father, that he would be happier without having to worry about teenage daughters. Thought it was a monstrous thing to say, but I figured it was just jealousy. And what about Dad? Isabella asked. Do you know where he really is? Carmen shook her head. I don't know, honey. But I can tell you one thing. 3 weeks ago, your father called me. The two leaned forward. What? He called the house, asking if I knew a trustworthy lawyer. He said he needed to organize some important documents and wanted someone who wasn't connected to the company's lawyers. Isabella and Valentina exchanged glances. Did he say why? No, but his voice was strange. He sounded worried, nervous. I gave him the name of a lawyer who helped my neighbor, a Mr. Henry Davis. His office is downtown. Isabella's heart raced. Maybe there was a clue there. Do you have his address? Carmen nodded and wrote it down on a piece of paper. But girls, you can't be wandering around like this. It's dangerous. Stay here tonight, take a shower, eat a proper meal. Tomorrow you can look for this lawyer. It was the first kindness they had received since being thrown out. Valentina started to cry with relief. Carmen hugged them like a mother, and for the first time in 24 hours they felt safe. But as they showered and put on clean clothes borrowed from Carmen, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about the call her father had made. Why would he look for a lawyer in secret? What was he trying to organize? And most importantly, where was he now? The answer to those questions was closer than they imagined, but also more terrible than they could conceive. Mr. Henry Davis had an office in an old building downtown, on the 3rd floor of a commercial building that had seen better days. Isabella and Valentina climbed the creaky stairs, each step echoing their nervous footsteps. Carmen had insisted they dress well, lending them 2 blouses and more presentable pants. The lawyer's waiting room was small and modest, with dark wood furniture and an elderly secretary who greeted them with a gentle smile. Do you have an appointment? She asked, looking at a handwritten planner. No, Isabella said, trying to control her nerves. But it's about Robert Miller. He called Mr. Davis a few weeks ago. The secretary's expression changed immediately. She looked at them more closely as if trying to recognize them. We're his daughters, Valentina finished. The woman stood up quickly. One moment, please. She disappeared through a door and returned a few seconds later. Mr. Davis will see you now. Mr. Henry Davis was a man of about 60, with completely white hair and piercing blue eyes behind his glasses. When they entered his office, he stood up from his desk and studied them carefully. Isabella and Valentina Miller, he said, not as a question, but as a confirmation. I've been expecting you. The two looked at each other, surprised. You were expecting us? Please, sit, he said, indicating 2 chairs in front of his desk. We have a lot to talk about. He took a thick folder from the cabinet behind his desk and placed it in front of them. Your father did come to see me 3 weeks ago, and what he told me was disturbing. Isabella's heart raced. What did he say? Where is he? Mr. Davis adjusted his glasses. Before I answer that, I need you to tell me exactly what has happened to you over the last few days. Isabella recounted the entire experience, from being thrown out of the mansion to meeting Carmen. The lawyer took notes and asked specific questions about details. When she finished, he sighed deeply. Worse than I imagined, he murmured. Your father was right to be worried. Worried about what? Valentina asked. Mr. Davis opened the folder and took out a few sheets of paper. Robert came to me because he suspected his wife was plotting something against him and against you. He had noticed strange movements in his bank accounts, documents being moved around in his office, meetings he wasn't invited to, but that involved his lawyers and accountants. Isabella leaned forward. What kind of movements? Money, transfers to accounts he didn't recognize, changes to company contracts without his authorization, and most importantly, he hesitated, he discovered that Veronica had approached 3 different doctors to get a psychiatric evaluation of him. Valentina covered her mouth with her hands. A psychiatric evaluation? She was trying to prove he had mental problems, specifically early-onset dementia. 2 doctors refused to sign a false report, but the third— Mr. Davis pulled out another document. The third accepted money to falsify a diagnosis. Isabella felt sick. That's what we saw on the table that night. A medical report about dementia. Exactly. So that report, she could get medical guardianship over Robert, take control of all his assets and— he looked at the 2 girls— get rid of you legally, claiming she wasn't in a position to care for minors as a non-blood relative. But where is our father now? Isabella insisted. Did he manage to protect himself? The lawyer's face grew grim. That's the most serious part of the story. Robert hired me to prepare a new will and asset protection documents. We scheduled a meeting for him to sign everything 3 days after our first meeting. He never showed up. Valentina grabbed Isabella's hand. What does that mean? It means Veronica acted before he could protect himself. Robert disappeared on the very day he was supposed to come here. Isabella felt the world spin around her. Do you think that she hurt him? I don't know, Mr. Davis said honestly. But I know he's being held somewhere against his will. Robert is a determined man. If he could, he would have already contacted me or you. The lawyer stood up and went to the window. There's one more thing you need to know. Robert showed me his original will. You 2 are the sole heirs to the entire family fortune. Veronica, in fact, would only be entitled to a monthly allowance and the house, nothing more. All the businesses, investments, and properties would pass to you when you turned 18. Isabella began to understand the scale of what was happening. That's why she needed to get rid of us. Exactly. With you out of the way and Robert incapacitated, she would inherit everything as the sole next of kin. Valentina was pale. But can she do that? Can she hide our father and take everything? Not if we have proof, Mr. Davis said, returning to his desk. And Robert was smart. Before he disappeared, he gave me copies of all the important documents, including the original will and evidence of Veronica's manipulations. He opened another section of the folder and showed them dozens of papers, bank statements showing the suspicious transfers, copies of emails between Veronica and the doctor who falsified the report, recordings of phone conversations. Recordings? Isabella's eyes widened. Your father had been suspicious for months. He started recording some of his conversations with Veronica. Listen to this. Mr. Davis turned on a small recorder on his desk. Veronica's voice echoed in the office, clear and cold. The girls are an obstacle, Robert. You should send them to a boarding school far away from here. They interfere with our plans for the company. Robert's tired voice replied, They're my daughters, Veronica. They're not an obstacle to anything. Yes, they are. And if you don't make a decision, I will make one for you. The recorder stopped. Isabella felt tears in her eyes. She's been planning this for months. This recording is from 2 months ago, Mr. Davis confirmed. Robert knew he was in danger, but he didn't imagine she would act so quickly. Valentina stood up, agitated. So what do we do now? How do we find our father? First, we need to file a lawsuit challenging the guardianship Veronica obtained. With this evidence, I can prove the medical report is fraudulent. And then? Mr. Davis sighed. Then we need to find out where she's keeping Robert. He's alive. I'm sure of it. Veronica needs him alive to maintain the charade that she's taking care of him, but he's being kept sedated or isolated somewhere. Isabella began to pace the room. How are we going to find him? We don't know where to look. Actually, the lawyer said, picking up another paper from the folder, we might. He showed them a payment receipt. This is a proof of payment I obtained through contacts at the bank. Veronica is paying a large monthly sum to a private clinic called Golden Valley Wellness Retreat. It's an institution that treats people with psychiatric problems. Valentina grabbed the paper. Is that where she put him? It's very likely. The clinic is 2 hours from the city. It's a discreet institution, the kind of place where wealthy families check in inconvenient relatives. Isabella felt a mix of relief and terror. At least they knew where to look, but the idea of finding her father in a psychiatric institution, possibly sedated and confused, terrified her. "Can we go there?" she asked. "It won't be easy," Mr. Davis warned. "These clinics have strict protocols. They only allow visits from authorized family members, and Veronica has certainly placed restrictions." "So how?" "I'm going to get a court order for an inspection," he said, "but it will take a few days to process. In the meantime, you need to stay safe. If Veronica finds out you're investigating..." As if he had summoned the situation, the office phone rang. The secretary answered and seconds later appeared at the door with a worried expression. "Mr. Davis, there's a woman in the building's lobby asking about 2 young women who might have come to see you today. She says she's their guardian." Mr. Davis tensed. "What does she look like?" "Elegant, blonde hair, driving a black imported car." Isabella and Valentina looked at each other in panic. It was Veronica. She had found out where they were. "How did she know?" Valentina whispered. "It doesn't matter now," Mr. Davis said quickly, putting all the documents back in the folder. "You need to get out of here. There's a fire escape at the back of the building." He handed the folder to Isabella. "Take this. These are copies of everything. And take this." He gave them some cash. "Find a safe place to hide for a few days. I'll expedite the legal process." They grabbed their things in a hurry. Mr. Davis led them through the back of the office to a door that opened onto the fire escape. "Don't go back to Carmen's house," he warned. "If Veronica found out you were here, she might find out about her too." Isabella clutched the folder to her chest. Inside those papers was the proof that her father was innocent, that Veronica was a criminal, that they were the true heirs. But it was also confirmation of their worst fears. Their father was trapped, possibly being drugged in a psychiatric clinic, while the woman who swore to love him systematically destroyed his life. "We're going to find him," Isabella said to Valentina as they climbed down the fire escape. "No matter what happens, we're going to save our dad." But as she spoke, Isabella couldn't stop thinking. If Veronica had found out about their visit to the lawyer, what else did she know? And how far was she willing to go to protect her crimes? Isabella and Valentina ran through the downtown alleys like fugitives, the folder of documents clutched to Isabella's chest and both of their hearts pounding out of sync. Every shadow seemed like a threat. Every passing car could be Veronica looking for them. They hid behind a dumpster when they heard the roar of an engine that sounded familiar. "Was that her car?" Valentina whispered, trying to peek around the side of the dumpster. "I don't know," Isabella said, breathing heavily, "but we can't take any chances." They waited 15 minutes before moving again. The afternoon sun was relentless, and the clothes Carmen had lent them stuck to their sweaty bodies. They needed a place to hide, review the documents, and plan their next move, but where? Isabella remembered the bus terminal. It was a public busy place where 2 girls wouldn't attract attention. They walked through side streets, avoiding the main avenues until they reached the terminal. The smell of diesel and cheap food greeted them along with the buzz of passengers. They found a secluded bench at the back of the terminal, and Isabella carefully opened the folder. The amount of evidence was staggering. Bank statements showing transfers of nearly $500,000 to accounts in Veronica's name, copies of emails where she arranged the price of the fake report with Dr. Sanders, the corrupt doctor, and more recordings of conversations. "Look at this," Valentina said, pointing to a document. "It's an admission contract from the Golden Valley Clinic." Isabella took the paper and read it aloud in a low voice. "Patient, Robert Miller. Diagnosis, early onset. Senile dementia with aggressive episodes. Legal guardian, Veronica Miller. Type of admission, therapeutic isolation with chemical restraint." "Chemical restraint," Valentina repeated, horrified. "They're drugging him." "And look at the date," Isabella said, feeling nauseous. "It was signed 3 days before she kicked us out. She had everything planned." Valentina found another, even worse document. "Isabella, there's a doctor's order here. Patient must remain sedated due to violent episodes. Do not authorize outside visitors without prior approval from the legal guardian. Isabella felt tears of rage in her eyes. She created the perfect excuse. If anyone tries to visit him, she can say he's violent and can't have visitors. But Mr. Davis will get the court order, right? Yes, but what if it takes too long? What if... Isabella couldn't finish the sentence, but they both thought the same thing. What if it was too late? A snack vendor passed by, and the smell of food made their stomachs rumble. They hadn't eaten anything substantial since breakfast at Carmen's house. Isabella used part of the money Mr. Davis had given them to buy 2 sandwiches and 2 drinks. As they were eating, a young man approached them. He was about 20, with dark hair and a kind expression. "Excuse me," he said, hesitating. "Aren't you Mr. Robert Miller's daughters?" Isabella and Valentina tensed immediately. "Who's asking?" Isabella said, ready to run again. "My name is Philip. I used to work at your dad's company. I was fired 2 weeks ago." He sat on the bench next to them uninvited. "When I saw you here, I thought I should talk to you." "Why were you fired?" Valentina asked. Philip sighed. "Because I questioned some strange things that were happening at the company. Mrs. Miller took over everything suddenly, fired several long-time employees, and started making changes that didn't make sense." Isabella was intrigued. What kind of changes? She sold 3 of the company's properties for prices far below market value. She cancelled profitable contracts and signed others that were clearly disadvantageous. It was like she wanted to weaken the company on purpose. "Why?" Valentina asked. "At first I thought it was incompetence, but then I found something out." Philip lowered his voice. "She was selling everything to a shell company, a company that after some digging I did belongs to her." Isabella's eyes widened. "She was stealing from her own company?" "Exactly. Buying low through a shell company and reselling high. The money went into her personal accounts." Philip took a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I managed to get some evidence before I was fired. I thought it might be useful someday." It was another piece of the puzzle. Veronica wasn't just stealing the girl's inheritance. She was systematically destroying and selling off the company Robert had built. "Philip," Isabella said urgently, "do you know anything about the clinic where our father is?" "A clinic?" Philip frowned. "But isn't your father traveling for medical treatment?" "That's what Mrs. Miller told everyone at the company." "It's a lie," Valentina said. "He's been committed to a psychiatric clinic against his will." Philip's face turned pale. "My God, that's kidnapping." "It is," Isabella said, "and she forged medical documents to justify it all." Philip was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Listen," he said finally. "I have a friend who works at Golden Valley. He's a nurse there. Maybe he can help us find out if your dad is really there." Isabella felt a flicker of hope. "You would do that?" "Of course, your dad was always fair to me, and what that woman has done is monstrous." Philip took out his phone and made a call. He spoke quietly, but the girls could hear parts of the conversation. "Yes, Robert Miller. Admitted a few weeks ago. Can you check discreetly?" He hung up after a few minutes. "My friend is going to check and call me back in an hour, but he said that if your dad is there, it'll be hard to get information. The clinic is very strict about patient privacy." While they waited, Isabella realized it was getting dark. They had nowhere to sleep, and going back to Carmen's was out of the question. "Philip," she said hesitantly, "do you know anywhere we could stay tonight? We have nowhere to go." Philip thought for a moment. "I have a small studio apartment. It's not much, but you can stay there for a few days until you sort this out." It was a relief to have found someone willing to help. They took a bus to Philip's neighborhood, a simple but safe area. The studio was indeed small, just 1 room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom, but it was clean and cozy. "Make yourselves at home," Philip said. "I'll sleep on the couch, you can have the bed." At 9 o'clock, Philip's phone rang. It was his friend from the clinic. The conversation was tense, full of pauses and whispers. When Philip hung up, his expression was grim. "Well?" Isabella asked, her heart in her throat. "Your dad's there," Philip said gravely. "But the situation is worse than we thought." Valentina sat on the bed, bracing herself for the worst. What do you mean? My friend managed to get a discreet look at his medical chart. Robert has been kept in total isolation for 3 weeks. He's on heavy sedatives 3 times a day and... Philip hesitated. And what? Isabella pressed. He's been trying to communicate that he shouldn't be there. He's been writing notes saying he's been kidnapped, that his wife forged documents. But the doctors think it's delusions caused by his dementia. Isabella felt the world spin. Her father was lucid. He knew what was happening, but no one believed him. He was screaming for help, but being treated like he was crazy. There's more, Philip continued. Veronica visited him yesterday. My friend overheard part of the conversation. She said that if he didn't stop causing trouble, she would increase his medication dosage. Valentina started to cry. She's torturing him. And there's something even worse, Philip said, clearly uncomfortable. Veronica gave instructions that if anyone showed up asking questions about Robert, the staff should call her immediately. Isabella froze. It means that if Mr. Davis shows up with a court order, Veronica will know instantly. She could move your dad to another location before anyone gets to see him. It was a dead end. If they waited for the court order, they could lose Robert. But if they tried to do something on their own, they wouldn't be able to get into the clinic. Philip, Isabella said, a dangerous idea forming in her mind. Your friend, could he help us get into the clinic? Get in? That's insane, Isabella. If you get caught, if we don't do anything, our dad is going to die in that place, Isabella said firmly. Or worse, he'll go crazy for real. Philip looked at the 2 girls, seeing the determination in their eyes. Let me talk to him. Maybe there's a way. But as Philip called his friend again, none of them noticed the black car parked across the street with an elegant figure at the wheel watching the building where they were hiding. Veronica had found them. Philip's phone rang at 6 in the morning, jolting them all from a restless sleep. Isabella woke with a start on the couch, where she had insisted on sleeping, leaving the bed for Valentina. Something in Philip's expression as he answered the call made her stomach churn. Yeah, I understand, Philip said into the phone, his voice tense. Thanks for letting me know. He hung up and looked at the girls with a grave expression. What is it? Valentina asked, still sleepy. That was my friend from the clinic. Something happened during the night. Philip sat on the edge of the bed. Your father had a crisis last night. Isabella stood up quickly. What kind of crisis? According to the official report, he became violent and tried to assault a nurse. As a result, they increased his medication and put him in physical restraints. That's a lie, Isabella said angrily. Dad has never been violent in his life. I know, Philip said, but it gets worse. My friend overheard the doctors talking. They're considering transferring Robert to the high-security psychiatric wing. He'd be completely isolated there with no possibility of visitors or contact with the outside world. Valentina covered her face with her hands. How much time do we have? The transfer could happen at any moment, maybe even today. Isabella began to pace back and forth in the small studio. We can't wait for the court order from Mr. Davis. We have to do something now. Isabella, it's too dangerous, Philip warned. If you get caught trying to get into the clinic, and if we don't try, our dad will be buried alive in that place, Isabella retorted. Philip, did your friend say he could help us? Philip sighed. He said there's a possibility. The clinic has a service entrance that's less guarded. He might be able to get us temporary visitor badges, but it would only be for a few hours during the shift change. I'll take that risk, Isabella said without hesitation. Me too, Valentina said, surprising them both. I'm not abandoning Dad. Philip looked at the 2 girls, seeing the determination in their eyes. Okay. I'll call him and try to arrange something for this afternoon. While Philip made the arrangements, Isabella reviewed the documents in the folder again. She needed to understand exactly how Veronica had gained so much control so quickly. A sentence in one of the emails intrigued her. The doctor confirmed the procedure can be performed without any risk to the plan. What procedure? She murmured. Valentina looked over her shoulder. What are you talking about? Isabella showed her the email. Veronica wrote this to someone named LS. They're talking about a medical procedure. The 2 read the full email. It was a conversation between Veronica and someone who seemed to be an accomplice, discussing the next steps of the plan. The most disturbing part was, if he continues to resist treatment, we'll have to resort to more drastic measures. More drastic measures, Valentina repeated. What does that mean? Isabella felt a chill. I don't even want to imagine. Philip returned from the kitchen with a mixed expression of hope and concern. My friend got the badges. We can try today at 3 p.m. during the shift change, but he warned that we'll have 15 minutes max. That's enough time, Isabella said. We just need to see Dad, confirm he's okay, and maybe get him to record a statement. With what? Philip asked. Isabella held up the phone Carmen had lent her. This phone has a voice recorder. If we can get Dad to confirm he was kidnapped, we'll have irrefutable proof. The rest of the morning passed slowly. They reviewed the plan several times, studied the clinic layout Philip found online, and prepared everything they might need. Isabella put the most important documents in a smaller folder she could hide in her clothes. At 2 in the afternoon, as they were getting ready to leave, Philip received a call that changed everything. Yeah, he answered. His expression quickly shifted to panic. Are you sure? When? A pause. I see, thanks. He hung up and looked at the girls with desperation. Call it off. Your father was transferred this morning. Isabella felt the floor drop out from under her. Transferred where? My friend doesn't know. They were very discreet. They just said he was being taken for specialized treatment at another facility. Valentina started to cry. We lost him. We lost our only chance. But Isabella wasn't ready to give up. Philip, can you find out where they took him? I can try, but it'll take time, and if they put him in a more secure facility? Philip's phone rang again. He answered hesitantly. Hello? His expression changed to confusion. Who is this? How did you get my number? He put the call on speaker. A cold, controlled female voice filled the small studio. Good afternoon. This is Veronica Miller. Isabella and Valentina looked at each other in panic. How had she gotten Philip's number? I imagine you're surprised, Veronica continued. You shouldn't be. I have enough resources to find out anything I need to. What do you want? Isabella asked, mustering her courage. Isabella, dear, what a joy to hear your voice. I want to talk to you both in person. Never, Valentina said. Oh, but I think you'll want to, Veronica said, her voice taking on an even colder tone. Because I have something you want very much. Information about where your father is right now. Isabella's heart raced. You'll tell us? I might consider it, if you agree to meet me. It's a trap, Philip whispered. Of course it's a trap, Veronica said, having apparently overheard. But it's the only chance you have of finding out where Robert is before it's too late. Too late for what? Isabella asked, terror rising in her voice. Well, let's just say the new facility he's in has more definitive methods for treating resistant patients. If you want to see him again, I suggest you accept my proposal. The silence in the studio was deafening. Isabella felt like she was being forced to choose between two abysses. Where do you want to meet us? She finally asked. At the mansion, where it all began. Today at 6 p.m. Come alone, obviously. How do we know you won't hurt us? Veronica laughed, a humorless sound. Dear girls, if I wanted to hurt you'd already be hurt. I want to make a deal. What kind of deal? We'll discuss that in person, 6 p.m. Don't be late. And Isabella? Yes? Bring all the documents you managed to get. I know you have copies of several interesting things. The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Philip was the first to speak. You can't go, it's obviously a trap. But it's the only lead we have on where our father is, Isabella said. If she really did move him to a worse place? Isabella, think about it, Philip said. Why would she make a deal? Why not just make you disappear like she did with your father? Isabella considered the question. It was true. It didn't make sense. Unless she needs something from us. What? Isabella picked up the folder of documents. Maybe she couldn't destroy all the evidence against her. Maybe she needs us to hand everything over voluntarily. Valentina wiped the tears from her eyes. Or maybe she wants to kill us herself. No? Isabella said thoughtfully. If she wanted to kill us, it would be easier to hire someone. She wants something, and that means we have something she needs. So what do we do? Valentina asked. Isabella looked at her sister, then at Philip, then at the folder of documents that could either save or condemn them all. We're going to the meeting, but not on her terms. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to find out what she really wants before we give her anything, and we're going to make sure that if anything happens to us, the evidence against her gets to the authorities. Philip shook his head. This is too risky. Everything is risky now, Isabella said, but for the first time since we were kicked out of that house, Veronica needs something from us, and that gives us an advantage we didn't have before. But as they laid their plans for the dangerous meeting, none of them knew that Veronica was not alone in her crimes, and that the deal she wanted to propose was far more sinister than any of them could imagine. At 5:45 p.m., Isabella and Valentina were hiding behind the bushes in the garden of the mansion where they had grown up, watching the house they once called home. The lights were on downstairs, but the place looked different, darker, as if Veronica's evil had seeped into the very walls. I still think we should have told Mr. Davis where we were going, Valentina whispered, shivering not just from the approaching evening chill. If we told him, he wouldn't have let us come, Isabella replied, checking to make sure her phone's voice recorder was working. And this might be our only chance to find out where Dad is. Philip had insisted on coming with them, but he remained hidden across the street, ready to call for help if needed. The plan was simple: go in, find out what Veronica wanted, record everything she said about their father, and get out. Simple in theory, terrifying in practice. Isabella touched the folder of documents hidden inside her jacket. They had made several copies and left one with Philip, another hidden in the studio, and a third with a letter for Mr. Davis in case something went wrong. At 6 o'clock sharp, they walked to the front door. Isabella took a deep breath before ringing the bell. The same familiar chime echoed through the house, bringing back painful memories of happier times. The door opened, but it wasn't Veronica, who appeared. It was a man they had never seen before, tall, thin, wearing sunglasses even though it was night, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Isabella and Valentina Miller, he said, as if checking a list. Punctual. Veronica appreciates punctuality. They entered hesitantly. The foyer was unrecognizable. All the furniture they knew had been removed or replaced. The walls, once filled with family photos, now displayed cold, impersonal, abstract paintings. It was as if the house had lost its soul. "Who are you?" Isabella asked the man. "Dr. Leonard Sanders," he replied, and the name made Isabella's blood run cold. He was the doctor who had falsified her father's dementia report. "I'm a medical consultant for Mrs. Miller." Valentina grabbed Isabella's arm. They had walked straight into a trap even bigger than they had imagined. Veronica appeared at the top of the staircase, descending slowly like a queen in her castle. She wore an elegant black dress and expensive jewelry that Isabella recognized as having belonged to her biological mother. "Girls," she said with an icy smile, "so glad you could make it. I'm looking forward to our chat." She led them to the living room, where more surprises awaited. There was a laptop open on the coffee table showing a video call. On the other side of the screen, in what looked like a medical room, was Robert. "Dad!" Valentina ran toward the laptop, but Dr. Sanders grabbed her by the arm. "Easy, dear. He can see and hear you, but you can only speak when I allow it." Isabella watched her father on the screen. He was sitting in a wheelchair wearing hospital clothes, and he looked confused and sedated. His eyes, once bright and intelligent, were dull, but when he saw his daughters, a spark of recognition flickered in them. "What have you done to him?" Isabella asked, trying to control her rage. "Nothing that wasn't necessary," Veronica said, sitting elegantly in an armchair. "Robert is receiving the best possible treatment for his condition." "What condition? He doesn't have dementia." "Oh, but he does," Dr. Sanders interjected, picking up a folder. "I have reports from 3 specialists right here confirming the diagnosis." Isabella knew they were fake, but she realized arguing was pointless. "What do you want?" Veronica smiled. "Straight to the point. I like that." She stood up and walked to the window. "You Want the truth? I'll tell you everything since we've reached a point of no return. She turned to face them. I didn't marry Robert for love. I married him because he was rich, and more importantly, because he had 2 minor daughters who would inherit everything. My plan was always to get rid of the obstacles to the inheritance. Valentina covered her mouth with her hands. You planned this from the beginning? From day one. But you two were harder to eliminate than I expected. Robert loved you too much, so I had to be more creative. Dr. Sanders laughed, an unpleasant sound. The dementia idea was brilliant. A demented man can't question the decisions of his responsible wife. But why are you telling us this? Isabella asked. If your plan worked... But it didn't work completely, Veronica said, her expression hardening. Because you two got your hands on documents that can incriminate me, and Mr. Davis is asking inconvenient questions. Isabella felt her phone vibrate in her pocket. It was a text from Philip. The police are on their way. Get out of there. She tried not to show what she had read, but Veronica noticed her tension. Is there a problem, dear? No, Isabella said, trying to buy time. I still don't understand what you want from us. I want you to sign these documents. Veronica picked up some papers from the table. They are statements confirming that Robert has always had mental problems, that you agree with his institutionalization, and that you acknowledge you have no right to the inheritance. We will never sign that, Valentina said. Oh, yes, you will, Dr. Sanders said, moving closer to the laptop screen. He gestured to someone off camera. Show them. The camera moved, revealing more of the room where Robert was. He wasn't just in a medical room. He was in some kind of laboratory with frightening equipment all around. What is that place? Isabella asked, horrified. It's an experimental clinic, Dr. Sanders explained calmly. We specialize in irreversible treatments for problematic patients, selective lobotomies, intensive electroshock therapy, experimental brain surgeries. Valentina screamed in horror. You're monsters. We're practical, Veronica corrected. If you sign the documents, Robert will continue to receive only sedatives. He'll be kept alive but incapacitated. If you don't sign... She gestured to Dr. Sanders. If you don't sign, we'll begin the experimental procedures tomorrow morning. In a week, Robert won't even remember his own name, and you'll never be able to prove he was kidnapped. Isabella felt sick. It was pure blackmail, her father's mental life in exchange for their silence and renunciation of their inheritance. We need time to think, she said. You don't have time, Veronica said. Sign now, or Dr. Sanders calls the clinic and authorizes the procedures to begin. At that moment, police sirens could be heard in the distance, growing closer. Veronica frowned and looked out the window. How interesting, she murmured. It seems you brought company. Dr. Sanders was nervous. Veronica, if the police get here... Calm down, she said, but her tone had changed. They're still going to sign the documents. They have no choice. Yes, we do, Isabella said, pulling her phone from her pocket. Because we recorded everything you just said. Confession of kidnapping, blackmail, conspiracy, falsifying medical documents. Veronica's face went white. You little fool. Dr. Sanders lunged toward Isabella to grab the phone, but Valentina pushed him. In the confusion, he knocked over the laptop, cutting the connection to where Robert was. Now we don't know where he is, Valentina cried. The sirens were very close now. Veronica ran to a desk drawer and pulled out a revolver. Nobody's going anywhere, she said, pointing the gun at the girls. Dr. Sanders, call the clinic. Tell them to start the procedures immediately. Veronica, this is insane, Dr. Sanders said. The police are coming. We have to get out of here. Not without settling this first. Isabella looked at the gun, then at Veronica's unhinged face, and realized the woman had crossed a line of no return. She was willing to kill to protect her crimes. The blue lights of police cars lit up the mansion's windows. Authoritative voices shouted through bullhorns, "Come out with your hands up." Veronica laughed hysterically. Too late, she said, keeping the gun aimed at Isabella. If I can't have everything, no one will have anything. But before she could pull the trigger, the front door burst open with a crash and several voices yelled, "Police, drop your weapons." In the ensuing chaos, with police swarming the room, shouting and scrambling, Isabella could only think of one thing. Where exactly was her father? And how much time did they have before the experimental procedures began? The battle for the inheritance had become a fight for Robert Miller's life and sanity, and time was running out fast. The chaos that erupted in the mansion lasted only a few minutes, but to Isabella it felt like hours. Police officers shouting orders, Veronica being disarmed and handcuffed, Dr. Sanders trying to flee through the back of the house, only to be caught in the garden. In the midst of the confusion, Isabella and Valentina hugged each other, trembling not just with fear, but with relief that they were still alive. The detective in charge of the operation, a middle-aged man named Mark Johnson, approached them after the situation was under control. "Are you two okay?" he asked with genuine concern. "Physically, yes," Isabella replied, "but our father, he's in danger. They were about to do terrible things to him." "We know," the detective said. "Mr. Davis briefed us on the whole situation, but we need to find out exactly where your father is being held." Isabella showed him the phone with the recording. "We managed to record their confession. They mentioned experimental procedures that were supposed to start tomorrow morning." The detective called a technician to analyze the recording immediately. Meanwhile, Isabella watched Veronica being led out of the mansion. The woman who had always seemed so elegant and controlled was now disheveled, her hair a mess and a look of pure hatred on her face. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourselves into," Veronica screamed at the girls as she was put in the police car. "You think you saved your father. You don't even know where he is, and by the time you find out it'll be too late." The detective tried to question Dr. Sanders at the mansion, but the doctor refused to speak without a lawyer present. However, a search of his cell phone revealed crucial recent messages. "Look at this," the technician said, showing them Dr. Sanders's phone screen. "He sent a message 20 minutes ago to an unidentified number. Begin procedures immediately. Do not wait for additional confirmation." Isabella's blood ran cold. "Does that mean they've already started?" "Not necessarily," the detective said. "The message was sent during the confrontation. It could have been a desperate attempt to pressure you. But when they managed to trace the number that had received the message, they discovered something disturbing. It was from a clinic called the Advanced Neurology Institute, located 4 hours away in an isolated mountain region. "We've never heard of this place," one of the investigators said. "It's not listed in any official registry of psychiatric clinics." Mr. Davis arrived at the mansion an hour later, accompanied by more lawyers and by Carmen, who had insisted on coming when she heard the girls were in danger. "Girls, thank God you're okay," Carmen said, hugging them like a mother. "When Philip called me and said you had come here—" "Philip called the police?" Valentina asked. "Yes," Mr. Davis confirmed. "He got worried when he saw suspicious activity around the house and decided not to wait." The lawyer handed some documents to the detective. "I got the court order for a search and seizure of any property related to Veronica Miller. That includes this so-called experimental clinic. But when they tried to contact the Advanced Neurology Institute, they found that all the phone lines were dead. Worse still, satellite images showed that the facility appeared to be in the process of being evacuated." "They're running," the detective said. "They know we're getting close." Isabella felt desperation rising inside her. "If they're running, what are they going to do with, our father?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Philip showed up at the mansion with his friend from the first clinic, the nurse who had helped with information about Robert. "I managed to talk to a contact who used to work at the institute," the nurse said nervously. "He told me there's a protocol for emergency situations." "What kind of protocol?" the detective asked. "If the clinic is discovered by the authorities, they have instructions to eliminate the evidence." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella immediately understood what eliminating the evidence meant when it came to kidnapped patients. "So how much time do we have?" Mr. Davis asked. "My contact said the protocol takes 6 hours to be fully executed. They have to destroy documents, transfer equipment, and—" He hesitated. "And what?" Isabella insisted. "And eliminate all traces of the experiments they performed on the patients." Valentina started to cry. "They're going to kill him." "No," Isabella said firmly. "We're not going to let that happen." The detective quickly organized a rescue operation. Police cars, an ambulance and specialized vehicles prepared for the 4-hour drive to the mountains. Isabella and Valentina insisted on joining the operation, despite the adults' protests. "He's our father," Isabella said. "We're going." During the drive, Mr. Davis explained more details he had uncovered about Veronica's conspiracy. She wasn't working alone. There's a whole network of people involved in this. Corrupt lawyers, unscrupulous doctors, even employees at the county clerk's office where she forged documents. "Why did they do it?" Valentina asked. "Money," Mr. Davis said simply. "Robert is a very wealthy man, and when there's that much money involved, there are always people willing to do anything to get a piece of it." They reached the area of the clinic at 2 in the morning. The Advanced Neurology Institute was in an isolated complex surrounded by high walls and security cameras, but when they got there, they found the place almost completely abandoned. "Too late," one of the officers muttered, looking at the empty buildings through binoculars. But Isabella noticed something. "Look there," she said, pointing to a smaller building at the back of the complex. "There are still lights on." The raid was swift and precise. Most of the staff had indeed fled, but they found 3 people trying to destroy documents in the administrative offices. More importantly, they found 6 patients who had been left behind, including Robert. Isabella ran through the clinic's corridors, following the police, until they reached a wing that looked more like a prison than a hospital. The doors were thick metal with small windows, and there were bars on the windows. "Dad!" she cried when they found him. Robert was in a hospital bed hooked up to several machines. He was conscious but visibly confused and weak. When he saw his daughters, his eyes filled with tears. "Isabella? Valentina?" His voice was faint and hoarse. "Are you okay? What? Where am I?" "It's okay now, Dad," Valentina said, holding his hand. "We came to get you." But when the doctor accompanying the operation examined Robert, his findings were alarming. "He's been subjected to heavy doses of psychotropic drugs for weeks," the doctor explained. "Some of these drugs can have permanent effects on memory and cognitive function." Isabella felt a pit in her stomach. "Permanent effects?" "It's too early to say. We need to admit him to a real hospital and do a full evaluation." "But," the doctor hesitated, "some of the drugs found in his system are experimental. We don't know all the long-term effects." As Robert was being prepared for emergency transport to the hospital, Isabella found something in the clinic's abandoned offices that made her blood run cold. A medical report with her father's name on it, dated just 6 hours earlier. The report described behavioral modification procedures that had been initiated. In technical medical language, it described what were essentially brainwashing techniques and selective memory erasure. "Mr. Davis," she called, showing him the document. They started the procedures. The lawyer read the report with an increasingly grim expression. According to this, they tried to erase Robert's memories of the last 2 years, including memories of Veronica and of you two. Valentina covered her mouth in horror. "Will he remember us?" "We don't know," Mr. Davis said honestly, "but at least he's alive, and there are treatments to reverse some types of neurological damage." At the hospital, 3 hours later, Isabella and Valentina waited outside the ICU where Robert was being treated. The doctors were doing everything they could to stabilize his neurological functions and flush the drugs from his system. Detective Johnson approached them with a grave expression. "Girls, we need to talk." "What is it?" Isabella asked, bracing for more bad news. "We found something else at the clinic. Documents that show this wasn't the first time Veronica has done something like this." Valentina frowned. "What do you mean?" "She had a first husband 5 years ago. A wealthy businessman who died under suspicious circumstances after being admitted for psychiatric treatment." Isabella felt the world spin around her. Veronica wasn't just a con artist, she was a serial killer who specialized in stealing fortunes from wealthy husbands. "How many people did she kill?" Isabella asked, her voice weak. "We're still investigating," the detective said, "but we believe there could be at least 3 similar cases." As they were talking, a nurse came out of the ICU with a worried expression. "Family of Robert Miller?" "That's us," Isabella said quickly. "He's asking to speak with you, but there's something you should know first. He seems to be confused about some things. He might not recognize you right away." Isabella looked at Valentina and saw her own fear reflected in her sister's eyes. After everything they had been through to save their father, was it possible he wouldn't remember them? Isabella and Valentina entered the ICU with hesitant steps, preparing for the worst. Robert was lying in the hospital bed hooked up to monitors, but his eyes were open and alert. When he saw them, his expression was one of genuine confusion. "Excuse me," he said politely, as if speaking to strangers. "Are you nurses? I'm having a hard time remembering things." Isabella's heart shattered. After everything they had gone through to save him, he didn't recognize them. Valentina began to cry silently beside her. "Dad," Isabella said softly, "it's us, Isabella and Valentina. Your daughters." Robert frowned, studying their faces intently. "Daughters? I'm sorry, but I don't remember you." He seemed genuinely distressed by this. "The doctors said I have some memory problems. Could you help me remember?" For the next 2 hours, Isabella and Valentina told stories from their childhood, showed old photos that Philip had brought from the apartment where they had been hiding, and talked about special moments they had shared. With each story, Robert listened attentively, but nothing seemed to spark his memory. "I'm so sorry," he said finally. "You seem like wonderful people, and I can see that you love me, but I just can't remember." Mr. Davis arrived at the hospital the next morning with news about the investigation. The good news is that Veronica and Dr. Sanders have been formally charged with kidnapping, forgery, fraud, and attempted murder. The bad news is that we've discovered the full extent of her crimes. "What do you mean?" Isabella asked. "She didn't just steal from you. Over the last 3 years, through shell companies and offshore accounts, she embezzled more than $15 million from your father's company. And that's not counting the personal assets, investments, and properties she sold illegally." Valentina turned pale. 15 million? Your company was on the verge of bankruptcy because of the embezzlement. Many employees lost their jobs, suppliers weren't paid, projects were abandoned. Isabella felt a mix of anger and sadness. How many people did she hurt? Hundreds. But there's an unexpected twist, Mr. Davis said, opening his briefcase. "We discovered that Robert, anticipating something like this could happen, set up secret security accounts 2 years ago. He hid a significant portion of the family's assets in an account under both of your names." "What do you mean?" "He never told Veronica about it. $15 million are safe in a joint account that can only be accessed by the two of you when you turn 18, or in the event of your father's proven incapacitation." It was a twist Isabella hadn't expected. Even drugged and confused, her father had been smart enough to protect their future. In the following days, Robert's recovery was gradual and full of ups and downs. Sometimes he seemed to remember small details, a song he used to sing to them, a specific gesture of affection. Other times, he would look at his daughters as if they were strangers. The doctors explained that the type of brain damage he had suffered could be reversible with time and proper treatment. But there were no guarantees. "Memory is a complex thing," the lead neurologist said. "Sometimes it comes back gradually, sometimes all at once, and sometimes it never fully returns." Isabella and Valentina took turns at the hospital, reading to their father, telling stories, showing pictures. Carmen visited daily, bringing homemade food and trying to awaken memories through familiar smells and tastes. It was Carmen who had the idea that changed everything. "Robert," she said during one visit, "remember when you first hired me? You said you needed someone to take care of the girls because they were the most precious thing you had in the world." "I said that?" Robert asked, interested. "You did. And then you told me about how Isabella would cry every night after Cecilia died and how Valentina refused to eat. You would sit by their beds for hours, reading stories until they fell asleep." Something shifted in Robert's face, an expression of intense concentration, as if he were trying to grasp a slippery memory. "Cecilia," he murmured. "I remember her. Brown hair, a sweet smile. She died in an accident." "Yes," Carmen said encouragingly, "and she left two beautiful girls that you raised with all the love in the world." Robert looked at Isabella and Valentina with a different expression. "Isabella was always stubborn," he said slowly. "And Valentina. Valentina was sensitive. She'd cry during sad movies." Isabella felt tears in her eyes. "You're remembering?" "Fragments," he said, "like pieces of a dream I'm trying to put back together." The recovery of Robert's memory was a slow process that took weeks. Each day brought back small recollections, a joke he used to tell, a place they had visited together, a silly fight they'd had. Gradually, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. During this time, Veronica's trial became one of the most followed criminal cases in the region. The press uncovered the sordid details of the conspiracy, including the revelation that she had killed her first husband in the same way she had tried to with Robert. Isabella and Valentina testified at the trial, telling their story from the night they were thrown out of the mansion to their father's rescue. The recording Isabella had made at the mansion was a key piece of evidence for the conviction. Veronica was sentenced to 20 years in prison for multiple felonies. Dr. Sanders received 15 years. Others involved in the conspiracy, including corrupt lawyers and employees, were also convicted. The most emotional moment came 3 months after the rescue, while Robert was in the hospital for physical therapy. Isabella was reading a book to him when he suddenly said, "You were always my brave daughter." "Dad," Isabella dropped the book. "My little warrior," Robert said, and his voice was different, clearer, more like himself. "And Valentina, my sensitive artist." He looked at them both with tears in his eyes. I remember everything. How small you were, how I took care of you, how I love you more than anything in the world." It was a moment of pure joy. After months of suffering, fear, and uncertainty, they finally had their father back. Robert's full recovery took another 6 months, but when he was finally discharged, he was mentally lucid and physically healthy. The first thing he did was go to the old mansion, which had been returned to the family after the investigation. "I don't want to live here," he said, looking at the place where so much suffering had occurred. "This house has bad memories now." They sold the mansion and bought a smaller, cozier house in a quiet neighborhood. Carmen was invited to live with them as part of the family, not as an employee. Robert rebuilt his company from the ground up, rehiring employees who had been unjustly fired and paying off the debts Veronica had created. Isabella and Valentina, now of legal age, became active partners in the business. "I don't want you to grow up without knowing the value of hard work," Robert said. "But I also don't want you to have to fight alone like you did." A year after the trial, Isabella received a letter in the mail. It was from Veronica in prison, asking for forgiveness and saying she regretted her crimes. Isabella read it once and threw it in the trash without a reply. Some wounds were too deep for forgiveness, but other wounds healed. Robert went back to being the loving, present father he had always been before Veronica entered their lives. Isabella went to law school, inspired by her experience with Mr. Davis. Valentina chose to study psychology, wanting to help other families who had gone through similar traumas. Philip remained a close family friend and eventually started dating Isabella, building a relationship based on the trust and companionship that had been born during their most difficult days. 3 years later, on a sunny afternoon, Isabella and Valentina were in the living room of their new house, studying for their university finals. Robert walked in with a smile on his face, carrying a briefcase. "Girls," he said, "I have a surprise for you." "What is it this time, Dad?" Valentina asked, suspecting another one of the surprises he loved to plan. "Remember the money I hid in those security accounts? Well, with the interest and investments I made, it's grown considerably. And today," he opened the briefcase, "you have officially become millionaires in your own right." Isabella and Valentina looked at each other and started to laugh. After everything they had been through, the expulsion, the nights sleeping in shelters, the fear, the desperation, the irony was almost comical. "You know what, Dad?" Isabella said. "The money is important, but it's not the most valuable wealth we have." "What is?" Robert asked. Isabella looked at her sister, at her father, at Carmen humming in the kitchen, at Philip arriving with flowers. The family we rebuilt, the trust we regained, the love that survived everything. Robert smiled and hugged his 2 daughters. You're right, that's priceless. That night, as they all had dinner together at the table in their new home, Isabella reflected on the journey they had taken. From the luxurious but cold mansion with Veronica, through the desperate nights on the streets, to this simple house filled with true love. The storm had passed, the sun had come out again, and the Miller family, tested by the worst of times, had emerged stronger and more united than ever. Sometimes Isabella still dreamed of that rainy night when they were thrown out of the mansion, but now, instead of a nightmare, the dream had become a reminder of her own strength. They had survived, they had fought, they had won, and most importantly, they had discovered that their true inheritance wasn't in mansions or bank accounts, but in the courage to fight for the ones they love, and the certainty that together they could weather any storm.